Activists say at least 106 people have been killed by US-led coalition airstrikes in the Syrian province of Deir Az Zor. The UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says more than 40 children are among the victims in the eastern town of Mayadeen. The US has admitted to carrying out an air campaign against ISIL fighters in the area. It says it's assessing the damage and takes all civilian casualties seriously. But the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights says not enough precautions are being taken to avoid civilian casualties caused by airstrikes in Syria.
The rising death toll of civilians and injuries to them already caused by airstrikes in Deir Az Zor and in al-Raqqa governorates suggests that insufficient precautions may have been taken in the attacks. And just because it's ISIL controlling an area, that doesn't mean less care can be taken. Just because it's a particularly unpleasant and horrendous group in charge, it doesn't mean those trying to wrest control of an area from them should take any less care with the civilians living in that area.
We can cross live now to Jamal Al-Shayal, who's in Gaziantep on the Turkey-Syria border. So clearly concern there from the UN about the impact of airstrikes on civilians in Raqqa, but also in the east in Deir Az Zor. What do we know about this latest airstrike?
We understand, Mariam, that up to 2 separate airstrikes by the US-led coalition took place Thursday evening in an area called Al-Mayadeen, which, as you point out, there is in Deir Az Zor in the east of the country. According to the UK-based Syrian Observatory of Human Rights, which is many acknowledge or maybe accept as one of the main authorities to in terms of monitoring the events in Syria, they say over 100 civilians were killed in those airstrikes. According to the regime's official news agency, the Syrian news agency, they're saying roughly 35. That's also corroborated with some local sources on the ground. But regardless, it is very clear that there has been a huge loss in terms of civilian casualties as a result of those airstrikes. SOHR is saying, that's the Observatory of Human Rights, they're saying that they are members, or family members rather, of ISIL fighters. However, some local sources are also disputing that, or saying it's very difficult to verify exactly who those were in terms of the civilians, because you know, these areas controlled by ISIL are practically closed off to the outside world. So it could just be civilians who have no sort of relationship whatsoever, either by near or by far, of ISIL, who were caught up just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, this death toll, essentially, Mariam, brings up the casualty figures as a result of the international coalition airstrikes over the past month to, if we go by what the Syrian Observatory of Human Rights is saying, almost 300 in the past month alone. If we're to go by the local sources on the ground, then roughly 220. But regardless, it's still a massive number, probably one of the highest since the international coalition was formed. And it's particularly significant, obviously, after a lot of talk in terms of NATO joining this international coalition and how things have been developing on the ground in terms of these de-escalation zones and other political attempts to find solutions there. So very significant developments, at least in terms of how things are developing on the ground when it comes to trying to ensure that there is some sort of shift away from the violence that's been ravaging those parts of the country for the past few weeks.
And Jamal, if you can give us a sense of what is happening in the east in Deir Az Zor, of the military operation there, and who is involved?
Well, what's been taking place over the past few weeks, or in fact a few months, Mariam, is that bit by bit areas that haven't been that weren't under the control of the regime were essentially being picked off by the Russians and the Syrian regime in order to ensure that they gain more control. And that was mainly areas that were under the control of armed rebel groups, not ISIL. You're talking about factions that were supporting the Syrian revolution, that were against Bashar al-Assad's regime. But simultaneously, the international coalition led by the US has been targeting areas that have been controlled by ISIL. One of those main areas has been Deir Az Zor, and the way in which things have been developing is, we mentioned, because Washington and the international coalition have been depending so much only on one partner on the ground, which is the Kurdish fighters that have specific presence in some areas. They don't have that many partners who can help them in terms of collecting intel on the ground, or in terms of identifying exactly where ISIL is, although they know that they control specific regions, but they don't know exactly where their fighters are or where their command centers are. And that's why, at least as far as Washington is claiming, that inability to get that credible information is what allows for these civilian casualties. But needless to say, in the end of the day, whilst it may be seen as some sort of tactical mistake, these are lives in the end of the day, lives of human beings, of mothers, of children and fathers who unfortunately, just as like hundreds of thousands of other Syrians across the country over the past 6 years, continue to find that they are victims of this war that they have at least nothing to do with in terms of trying to find an end to it.
Thank you very much, Jamal Shayal in Gaziantep. Well, Colonel Ryan Dillon is the spokesman for the US-led coalition against ISIL. He told Al Jazeera great care is taken to avoid civilian casualties, and the US coalition is not the only force targeting the area.
And the coalition goes through very significant and deliberate processes to make sure that we can mitigate the human suffering and the human casualties as we continue our fight to defeat Daesh. We take every single civilian casualty allegation very seriously, and we look into all of the allegations very thoroughly. We can say with a very assured exactly whether or not we have conducted these strikes. And in the past, and as we have always done, we are open and transparent with that. I would like to say, though, that in this particular area of Syria, it is a very congested battle space. And yes, we do conduct airstrikes there, but I know that there are other actors and players